TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Happy New Year to you and yours. Hogmanay is off in Scotland, but I'm wearing my kilt and I may well do Donald Where's Your Trousers before the end of the show. This is Auld Lang Syne live in the dying embers of 2021. Coming up, terrorists? Do you feel we don't have enough on our streets? Well, a whole bunch of them are heading back, fit, rested and refreshed after a spell at Her Majesty's pleasure. The rapper Zuby will be with us. He's the manly man who broke the ladies' world deadlift weightlifting record. Don't worry, he was identifying as a woman at the time, so it's all on the up and up. Conrad Black is here. He may challenge Zuby on that deadlift thing, woman to woman. And of course, the indispensable part of the show, your questions and comments. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews. Ask me anything. It's New Year. Give it your best shot. But first, the news with Karen Roberts.
Thank you, Mark. Here are your headlines. The sentences of the stepmother and father who killed Arthur Labinjo Hughes have been referred to the Court of Appeal for being too lenient. Emma Tustin was jailed for life with a minimum of 29 years after being convicted of his murder. Thomas Hughes was given 21 years for manslaughter. The 6-year-old died from a brain injury whilst under their care in June last year. A date for the hearing is yet to be set. A 15-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a teenager was stabbed in South London. It was one of 2 fatal incidents which brought the number of teenage homicides in the capital this year to a record number of 30. A 16-year-old boy was killed in Eusleigh and a 15-year-old died in Croydon. London Mayor Sadiq Khan says he's devastated by the double tragedy. New data shows the risk of being admitted to hospital as a result of Omicron is about 1/3 that of Delta. The UK Health Security Agency studied more than 1 million cases of both variants. It found booster jabs are extremely effective against Omicron, with a 3rd dose leading to an 81% reduction in the risk of hospital admissions compared to unvaccinated cases. Britain has become one of the first countries in the world to approve the use of a Pfizer COVID-19 pill for at-risk adults. The UK's medicines regulator says Paxlovid is most effective when taken early, recommending it be used within 5 days of the first symptoms. It's for anyone aged over 18 with a mild to moderate infection who's at risk of developing severe symptoms. Hogmanay celebrations have been cancelled across Scotland because of the surge in COVID cases. London, however, will ring in the new year with a fireworks display, but people are being told to watch it on TV. A warning, we're about to show you some flashing images. Here's how Hong Kong brought in 2022.
3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
Fireworks and light shows were on display at the Sky Tower in Auckland, in New Zealand, and of course at the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Australia. 6 tons of fireworks and 80,000 pyrotechnic effects lit up the sky to mark the occasion. That's your news update. I'll be back with your latest headlines at the top of the hour. Now back to Mark.
Happy New Year to you, Karen. I always love that Sydney Harbour Bridge New Year. It's New Year's Eve at GB News. We are live tonight as 2021 goes down the toilet of history. If you're worried that it might claw its way back up to torment us for another 3 or 4 months, don't worry. Madonna is standing or actually sitting guard. She released a photograph of herself. There it is. On the toilet for New Year. I don't know where in the world that is a New Year tradition, but if you're in the country in which the sitting on the toilet for New Year tradition originated, for God's sake, don't send me any more pictures. Anyway, Madonna for some reason chose to release a photograph of herself on the toilet for New Year, but we should all be grateful at least she didn't release a new CD. At the Downing Street New Year press briefing, Sir Patrick Vallance and Professor Chris Whitty were asked by the BBC, should old acquaintance be forgot? And their advice is, oh, definitely, even if your old acquaintance is quadruple jabbed. It's just not worth the risk. Forget about him. What do you think are going to be the big stories of 2022? The migrant fiasco on England's southern shore, Chinese moves on Taiwan, whatever it is, let me know via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or via Twitter @gbnews. The management cautioned me before tonight's show that under no circumstances am I to do a retrospective look back at the last 12 months because everybody and his Auntie Mabel has done a retrospective look back by now. So I thought we'd do a retrospective look back at everybody else's retrospective look backs. No, I'm just kidding. Instead of a retrospective on 2021, how about a retrospective on 1921? Bear with me on this. The big news of December 1921 was the agreement between His Majesty's government and Irish Republican revolutionaries to create the Irish Free State. And somewhat to the surprise of London, yeah, there they all are. That's that one at the far right is Arthur Griffith. Let me work this out. My great uncle was his lawyer. Small world. Anyway, somewhat to the surprise, that's the Irish delegation, somewhat to the surprise of London, Dublin and Belfast, that settlement of 1921 has lasted, despite the best efforts of the IRA, for a century, until Brexit and COVID. Boris Johnson's deal with the EU moved the border into the Irish Sea, and under cover of COVID, the Irish government has been hardening that border, in effect shrinking the common travel area from the entire British Isles to merely the island of Ireland. And Boris Johnson, a man who just 2 years ago said he wanted to be known not as Prime Minister, but Minister of the Union, is letting his nation's borders be redrawn by Brussels and Dublin. OK, enough of 1921. How about a retrospective 1821? In 1821, James Monroe began his second term as President of the United States. He's the fellow who came up with the Monroe Doctrine to end any further expansion in the Americas by other great powers and to regard any foreign interference in Central and Southern America as a threat to the United States. Right now, 200 years on, Chinese money is hollowing out and buying up Latin America one by one. as it's doing with the Commonwealth. And the dead husk that is Joe Biden is letting it happen, notwithstanding the Monroe Doctrine. China has hypersonic weapons, that's space nukes in common parlance. So does Russia. And the Pentagon, never mind Her Majesty's Armed Forces, can't seem to get it together on that front to get any hypersonic weapons of our own. The Daily Mail reports that Chairman Xi is developing brain control weaponry that can paralyze the brains of its enemies and take control of them. Seriously, this is happening at China's Academy of Military Sciences. The brain paralysis technology is in its early stages, but there are indications the Politburo has begun testing it on the G7.
Okay, hang on. Sorry. Oh.
He's not the only one they've zapped with the brain paralysis machine.
Forgive me. Forgive me.
I won't show you the Justin Trudeau one, but he gets out the shoe polish again and goes into his routine. Okay, so much for our retrospective of 1821. How about 1721? The big story in 1721 was the Great Plague riots. Yeah, they had some sort of bubonic pandemic in Moscow, but the riots were caused not by the plague, but by the government lockdown and the enforced tanking of the Russian economy. Of course, the Muscovites were a primitive people and didn't know how to follow the science, as they say, so instead they followed it to the Kremlin and sacked it. That breaking news, boys and girls, from 1721 has no relevance to our own time. Don't even think about it. Okay, one more from our retrospective of 1521. That's 500 years ago. In 1521, Suleiman the Magnificent, the all-powerful Ottoman Sultan, you know he's all-powerful because look at the size of that turban. It's either a turban or an upturned pumpkin on his head. You can, girls, you can never tell anything about a guy from the size of his turban, but that is an impressive one. The all-powerful Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent, presided over the biggest expansion of the Islamic Caliphate, and he launched the siege of Belgrade. Since then, of course, we've become far more enlightened and understand that all Suleiman the Magnificent needed was a couple of months in de-radicalization class. Speaking of which, 92 convicted terrorists could be released from prison this coming year. They're up before the parole board and include a co-plotter of the London Bridge attack 2 years ago and an associate of the perpetrator of the Ariana Grande Manchester Arena bombing. But don't worry, the parole board assures us that, quote, any terrorist, convicted offender released into the community will be subject to some of the strictest license conditions available, unquote. Joining me now is Dr. Sally Leavesley, Managing Director at New Risk Limited. Sally, should the public be worried about the potential release of these convicted terrorists?
The biggest protection is these terrorists, serious offenders, being in jail for the longest time feasible. Once they are released, the public depends on how the assessment of the release has gone, what the risk assessment has been, and the coordination of the police and the security services. But a terrorist out of jail who is determined to kill, we have seen remains a very serious threat to the public.
Isn't it also the case that they're quite adept at acing de-radicalization class and the other hoops they have to jump through? There was one Australian jihadist just recently who consciously chose to fake his way through de-radicalization class quite successfully. On one of the recent attacks in London a couple of years back, the guy was actually down in London taking part in a congratulatory panel on how their de-radicalization processes had worked. So they're getting actually quite good at faking the system, aren't they?
You're correct in this, and it isn't just fooling de-radicalisation programs. Apart from releasing serious terrorist offenders from jail, the risk assessment by the most experienced assessors on the parole board and all the other services can still make a mistake. And that will remain a weak point on the release of these terrorists, because we have found, and it's really, we've noticed it really growing as a terror tactic since 9/11, and the 9/11 attackers were expert as well at people being able to mimic good behaviour, mimic social values, pretend to good-hearted people that they have changed, and it's not a change, it's just a tactic.
Yeah, the thing seems to be that they understand our psychology better than we understand theirs. You know, there are arguments about whether prison reforms people who just, rob the local corner store. Is it really a useful model to apply to something as fundamental to one's identity as jihad and the urge to jihad, or is our whole philosophy on this problem completely wrong?
We need to have a totally different set of rules for people who are capable of mass casualty attacks. And right at this time now is a very serious time for release of a number of offenders over perhaps the next 12 months. Serious terrorists who've been released in other countries. If we look at Iraq and Afghanistan, there have been escapes and forced release of prisoners to support local networks with quite serious attacks. People are now getting back on trains, they're getting back on planes, they're in crowds. So the targets are now available. Anyone who's determined as a terrorist who's released from prison will just add to the dynamics of a network planned attack. So it is an increased risk to the public.
The one that always strikes me isn't that far away, but I happened to go to the guy's funeral, and that was the Catholic priest in France who was near decapitated during Mass by a man who was out on parole and actually wearing one of those security ankle bracelets at the time. But the French police, despite that, let him go ahead and slaughter this priest during Mass in front of the nuns and congregants. I mean, at some point, isn't it worth, we had emergency measures during the whole business in Northern Ireland, wouldn't it be worth just saying this is a separate category? This is not a criminal justice issue. It belongs in a different category.
Any mass casualty threat to the public is really a different category, and I'd hope that the current guidance that's being considered for judges to use in future sentencing will take this into account. But we have to stop people falling for terrorist deception. That's really important. The other thing that we have to understand, and this is a public protection issue as well, is people think surveillance is like bodyguarding, but it isn't. And what we've seen is within 60 seconds in the recent couple of years, terrorists have been able to cause severe damage to the public. 60 seconds allows killing with a knife, getting a vehicle, or even the use of an improvised explosive device. So we can still have mass casualties with close surveillance.
Yeah, that's an absolutely critical point. They only need a few seconds to go loose, and it doesn't matter whether you've monitored them successfully for the previous 5 months. That's a very important point. Thank you for that, Sally, and a happy New Year to you. And I hope you'll come back and talk with us more about this. What do you make it?
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
A very mild start to 2022. It's going to be a blustery day with gusty winds, but although there'll be some rain around, much of the day will be dry and bright. And as I said, very, very mild. Low pressure is sitting out to the west, and that's allowing these southerly winds to bring the mild air. A little chilly across northern Scotland at the moment, and it's not completely dry. There's a weather front here bringing some patchy rain and drizzle. A few showers maybe for Northern Ireland and Scotland, but the bulk of England and Wales dry as we usher in 2022, and wherever you are, it is mild, with temperatures actually climbing across northern Scotland through the early hours, and many places elsewhere staying in double figures or higher. So it's not a cold start, but it will be a largely dry start. There's a line of rain across western parts of England, Wales and Scotland. That'll work from west to east through the morning, but kind of fizzle out as it reaches the Midlands. Could pep up again, though, bringing a bit of rain to East Anglia and the southeast in the afternoon. Showers for Northern Ireland, western Scotland. Very windy here, and a blustery day elsewhere, but with some sunshine. Look at those temperatures again, widely into the teens. Through the course of the evening, that rain likely to stick around across the far southeast. A few showers elsewhere, and some heavier bursts of rain during the early hours of Sunday, crossing England and Wales. Still around on Sunday morning across the eastern parts of England. Still breezy on Sunday, although not quite as windy, at least initially. But then we've got to look at this little weather feature, a band of potentially very heavy rain and gusty, squally winds working across England and Wales during Sunday. I say that needs to be kept a close eye on because it could provide some very heavy rain. Brighter skies further north with a mixture of sunshine and showers, but it will be windy. Still mild on Sunday, but not as mild, and temperatures are dropping off as we go through the next few days. Northerly winds set in, so finally turning a bit colder from Tuesday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Back to New Year's Eve Live with Mark Steyn. Let's get to your comments. Stuart asks, could someone explain the difference between Islamic terrorism and a right-wing terrorist, and why do we not refer to left-wing terrorism? Well, there is actually a so-called right-wing terrorist who is on this list of guys who may be coming out on the streets again in the new year. But the main difference is this, that there is no organised right-wing mass terrorist movement committing terrorism, whereas there is a mass terrorist movement from the global jihad boys. Even though, in fact, that's the reality. That's the reality. There is no strategic global right-wing terrorism movement, but there is one by the guys who want to establish a global caliphate. Yet, oddly enough, if you watch the dear old British media and a lot of other Western media, they present it as exactly the opposite. Every jihadist is just a so-called lone wolf, as they say, even though they all belong to the amalgamated union of lone wolves. Whereas, for example, with the right-wing terrorists, they genuinely are, for the most part, lone wolves, lone crazies when they do something. But they're always presented as part of some mass movement about to overwhelm the reality of our lives. I'll say one other thing on those, on this difference. Presenting the Islamic jihadists strictly as lone wolves. Oh, somehow they were perfectly normal. He was a nice boy. He was always very moderate. Then he just happened to Google the wrong website, and he radicalized all of a sudden. This is a tremendous advantage to the people who want this to keep happening, because it's not like old kinds of terrorism where you had to meet your control guy who'd leave the details of your mission underneath a rock in Hyde Park or whatever it is. This is just where people just spontaneously combust and decide to go all stabby or blow up an Ariana Grande. So that's part of the basic dishonesty about how we talk about it. We don't address in any way the ideology. We just refer to it in coy euphemisms like radicalization and de-radicalization. So there's going to be a lot more of it until we stop. Then Mike says, I wonder why there are a lot of stabbings from black and ethnic minority youths, yet Black Lives Matter are calling for defunding of the police. You are right that the principal victims, there's an awful lot of black on black crime, both in London and in places like Chicago, where each weekend you're given a death toll, which is basically blacks killing other blacks. And yet, the mayor of Chicago and almost everybody else talks about anything, but they only talk about the racism of the police. So in fact, the principal victims of black crime are other blacks, and in Chicago, a black guy is more or less almost certainly to be offed by another black guy as opposed to some racist white cop, although those things do happen from time to time. But I would like to propose something here. You know, America has a particular racial history. The United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, most of the continental countries have a completely different racial history. So imposing the American paradigm through the Black Lives Matter movement does a huge disservice to the reality of life, not just in Britain today, but through the last couple of centuries. Same thing in most of the rest of the Commonwealth. It's a completely different racial history, and this very parochial, very particular Black Lives Matter paradigm is one thing we should dump in the new year and instead come up with a racial paradigm that is more reflective of UK or Canadian or Australian reality or whatever. Thank you for that. Keep your comments coming. Stump the Steyn will be here later on, so do let me know what you want to talk about. GBviews at gbnews.uk. On Wednesday, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted in New York of sex trafficking underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein. At the exact same time, federal prosecutors quietly dropped their charges against the prison guards who were careless enough to let Jeffrey Epstein, quote, commit suicide on their watch. Unlike those convicted terrorists we were just talking about, Miss Maxwell faces up to 40 years in jail. None of the many powerful Americans who had sex with these underage girls is facing any charge or any investigation. So it's all very cozy. Joining me now is Conrad Black, one of the few men on earth who despises the US federal justice system even more than I do. Conrad, it's great to see you. I should say that you actually, I don't know whether they were ever great buddies of you, but you are acquainted with both Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, because there's a very funny scene in your wife Barbara Meal's memoir, where at the time of your own troubles with the US Federal Justice Department, Barbara was having an awful time, and she walks into a party and she sees Ghislaine Maxwell, who had apparently been pestering the two of you to hop aboard the Lolita Express and come to that island. And Barbara is thinking, you didn't want to at that point, but Barbara's thinking, oh, that would be such a nice break now. And instead, Ghislaine cuts Barbara dead and moves on to someone else in the party. So you have a slight acquaintanceship with Epstein and Ghislaine.
Oh, I knew them, yes. I knew most of the Maxwells. On that occasion, we were the hosts of the party, and it was for the launch of my book about Franklin D. Roosevelt, so it was particularly odd. But the last thing Barbara and I wanted to do was go to Jeffrey's Island, but not that we had any idea that sociopathic things went on there. But yes, I must say I knew Ghislaine for many years, and I saw her a couple of years ago, and I always liked her. I've always found her rather an engaging, pleasant person, but obviously I didn't know anything about all this other stuff.
Is this a racket? I mean, all the most powerful men in the Democratic Party, Bill Clinton, former president, George Mitchell, the senator who was the American end of the so-called Irish peace process, Bill Richardson, the governor of New Mexico, all big shot Democrats. And the upshot of this case
the majority
is
leader
that
of the Senate, and Richardson was the ambassador to the UN, so they were very prominent people.
Yeah, and none of them, they're all on the manifest of the so-called Lolita Express, but it looks like it's a British subject and potentially another British subject, the Duke of York, who are the only people who seem of interest to prosecutors. Don't you find that odd?
I find the whole thing odd. In fairness, the fact that somebody went to that island doesn't mean that they did anything improper, let alone illegal. I mean, you might question their social taste in going, but that's another matter. And I think we want to be careful about too much guilt by association here. I think if you really had a strong case against those people, given that some of the ones who have been identified as frequenters of Little St. James Island, I think it's called, are wealthy people. In the United States, you don't have to give potential litigants a great deal of incentive before they come snorting out of the undergrowth, suing you for $1 billion. And so I think we want to be a little careful about assuming that these people who made that trek necessarily did improper things when they were there. And I would say, I certainly don't defend what Guylaine is convicted of doing, but where the witnesses have been paid by the Epstein Defense Fund before they testify and have been told by counsel that it'll strengthen their position as civil litigants if they do testify. I have my doubts. That doesn't vitiate the result, but I think it taints it slightly, because I don't think that sort of thing would be acceptable in Britain or in Canada. An incentivization.
Why don't you just? Yeah, which is I think wholly improper. Would be in the rest of the common law world, as you say. Why don't you just give? Because these are always shocking to me, Conrad, and you're really the only person who talks about them. Why don't you just give us a précis of the conviction rates in the federal so-called justice system of the United States? Because they're really quite staggering.
Yeah, approximately 98% conviction, 95% of those without a trial. And it basically comes down, there are a number of things. The prosecutors speak last instead of the defense, which I think is improper and unlike other civilized countries. But the worst part of it is that the prosecutors, under the plea bargain rules, can negotiate with potential witnesses. And they can, in fact, and do frequently say, well, look, if you can't jog your memory and come up with something useful here, then there's a conspiracy to subvert justice, and you're part of it, and we're charging you. If, on the other hand, you have a miraculous end of this amnesia, and it's useful to the prosecution, we guarantee you absolute immunity against a charge of perjury. Now, this is a form of leverage and pressure that is improper to put in the hands of prosecutors who have plenty of credibility at extracting legitimate evidence as it is. But and this is what, more than anything else, produces this ludicrous rubber stamp, virtual Red Queen percentage of guilty findings in American courts. If you have a point of law and you can get to a higher court and you have millions of dollars to pay counsel in that 360-degree legal cartel that operates in the U.S., then you have a chance, not a good chance, but a chance. That's how I won in the end. But otherwise, you're cooked, and that's why everyone plea bargains at the start and says, they say the prosecutors don't go to court very much. They just sit there intimidating people.
No. I'll never forget that, Conrad, during your trial in that big federal building in Chicago, which I attended. And there was a trial going on against you in one courtroom. I went through all the other courtrooms on that floor, the courtrooms upstairs, the courtrooms downstairs. They were all empty, because people don't know this, that when you have 98%, as you say, 95% of the cases, the government wins without going to court. That would impress Kim Jong-un. That would impress Chairman Xi. That would impress every dictator on the planet, who would probably think, you're making it a bit too high a percentage. I'd like it to look a little more credible.
And I believe the British percentage, the corresponding one, is only about 61%. And by the way, in the states in the U.S. where the rules are different, the percentage is lower. It's more of an equitable system there. For reasons that are buried in problems in the 60s, the particularly strong fear of black radicals at the time, and the riots in some of the prisons, San Quentin and up in Rochester, you got this very lopsided piling on to the prosecution side. All this demagogic nonsense about 3 strikes and you're out. So, and it went across the board. Nelson Rockefeller and Bobby Kennedy were just as draconian as Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon. So you had these, a man steals 3 packets of 5-cent cigars 5 years apart, and he can be sent down for 25 years, no parole. I mean, it's just absurd. The system there is a conveyor belt to the bloated and corrupt prison system. But with all that said, I'm not suggesting that there was no possibility that Ghislaine was not guilty here. I mean, I suspect that I think that where underage people were involved, she has a serious legal vulnerability in any court. And but I have a problem myself with these things that were not crimes at the time, but have become crimes since. And that would apply to some of the offenses allegedly committed by her against people who were of age at the time.
Yeah, and that also applies in Prince Andrew's situation too. Thank you for that, Conrad. Your book, dealing with what happened to you, the takeaways from this are very important, and people should bear in mind those. We shouldn't be extraditing to a country with a 98% conviction rate. France, for example, doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States like this. Thank you very much, Conrad Black, and a happy new year to you. Every year, every night is like New Year for Conrad, because he generally doesn't go to bed till after midnight. So maybe on New Year's Eve he decides he's going to have an early night and turn in about 9:15. Okay, let's do an ad-lib round of Know Your Ensigns as it's New Year's Eve. Do you want to know because the Chancellor of the Exchequer said there were going to be tax incentives for boats flying the British Red Ensign. We love all British ensigns here. It's one of the great flag designs in history. Here is the Tuvalu Ensign. Do you know the significance of that? They occasionally, years go by and they add a couple of stars or they take off a couple of stars. They've modified it a bit over the year. Tuvalu is the first of Her Majesty's dominions to welcome in the new year. It used to be the Gilbert Islands, Kiribati, which is the Ellis Islands. They're even weirder because they straddle the international date line and the equator, so it's simultaneously yesterday and tomorrow, summer and winter in Kiribati. And do you know what these ones are? Here, let me hold this one up. That's the Cook Islands. That's the that's the penultimate of Her Majesty's dominions to see in 2022. It's hours away yet. And here's another one. Do we have this one? The Yellow Ensign. I think this is the only Yellow Ensign. This is from Nui. And what I like about this one is the yellow's a bit boring, but as you can see, those stars in the Union Jack are absolutely fascinating. And that's the one of Her Majesty's dominions that welcomes in the new year last. We will be back in a minute with Zuby. Don't touch that dial.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to New Year's Eve Live. Let's have a few more of your comments. Wendy says, I live in Woolwich, southeast London. I literally walk less than a mile from where Lee Rigby was killed by terrorists and a few hundred feet from the IRA bomb attack on the King's Arms pub in the 70s. Do we really need any more terrorists out on our streets? No, we do not. What happened to Lee Rigby in the middle of the street in broad daylight was a complete disgrace. And as Professor Leavesley said, you can monitor someone perfectly competently for 6 months. All they need is 60 seconds when your back is turned. Jane asks, Mark, help us get the proper Brexit we voted for, please. I'm in favour of a no-deal Brexit. I think it's disgraceful. The EU, through the government in Dublin, are determined to make Brexit a failure as a lesson to any other country minded to leave the European Union. And the degraded status of Northern Ireland should shame everybody in this country. One more. Daniel says, Mark, we've seen 30 teenage homicides this year. I personally believe that the problem has been allowed to get worse by the police turning a blind eye. Do you agree? Of course I do, Daniel. In the United Kingdom, everything is policed except crime. That's the problem. My next guest has the distinct honour of being a world-renowned male rapper. And also, and there's a lot of male rappers around, but he is also a world champ at the women's deadlift. 525 pounds. That was then a ladies' deadlift record, and he self-identified as a woman for the exact duration of that lift. So it's great to see women shattering the glass ceiling, particularly a fine-looking woman like that. Those are the rules now. Zuby joins me. I very much enjoyed seeing that. It's a fantastic, it's a fantastic thing. But at the same time, you must have known that you were going out on a limb somewhat, and that woke world was not going to be happy with you pulling those kind of stunts.
Hey, I was just playing by the rules. It's not what I expected would be what was going to launch me into the spotlight internationally. But here we are, almost 3 years on, and people are still finding delight in it. So I'm happy that I did it.
But you didn't do it to become more famous. You did it because you actually believe in this, that if you identify as a woman, and you can, I think you also did it with a bench press as well, that you could become the ladies' champion in these weightlifting events, simply because those are the rules they say. You've also supported J.K. Rowling. And I don't know whether you and J.K. Rowling might not seem obvious soulmates, but this is an issue you're not, like her, you're not prepared to go quiet on this.
No, I mean, look, it's a whole silly thing. I mean, the fact that I posted that video in February 2019, and here we are almost going into 2022, and this thing is still a raging debate and a point of controversy just shows how bizarre of a society that we are currently living in, where simply acknowledging reality as we've all always known it has somehow become controversial or something that you are not supposed to be doing. I don't think there's all that much that I say or anything that J.K. Rowling or anyone else has particularly said on this issue that should be shocking or threatening to anybody in any way. But I think that things have just shifted so hard now that simply trying to be honest and to tell the truth and to say what other people are thinking now really makes people stand out.
Well, the big change is this, isn't it? That 30, 40 years ago, up to certainly until the turn of the century, it used to be accepted that there were differences of opinion, that you had opinion A and you had opinion B, and you might hold one or other of them. Now we seem to be in a world where there's a correct opinion to have on these things, and therefore if you have an opinion that differs from it, you have to be shut down, you have to be squashed, you have to be crushed like a bug. That's the way it is on trans rights and certain other issues now, isn't it?
Well, I think it's important to be careful with words here because we're living in the age of weaponization of words. And this is not a question about trans rights per se. That's the language that activists use to make it seem that anyone who is challenging or questioning them has, something against a whole demographic of people or thinks that they should have less rights or anything like that. That's not what any of it is. Everyone I know who is a decent and reasonable human being believes that every single person, regardless of their age, race, gender, whatever, people should have the same basic human rights and be afforded the same dignity. However, reality does exist. And if you are looking at something such as biology as we know it, which of course goes into not just the world of reproduction and the way we socially interact, but also something very obvious like the world of sports. We all know that men and women have different bodies and are biologically built and wired differently. There's nothing controversial about that. This goes far beyond the human species. It goes across all animal species. And so that's why with something like sports, why you have different categories, because if you did not have a separate division for women's sports, then you would not have professional women's sports, because the biggest, fastest, strongest people in the world are all male, because males in general, and especially at the top levels, are always going to be stronger and faster than females are. And that should not be considered a slight to anybody. That's just an acknowledgement of reality. And it's important that, yes, we absolutely should be able to have discussions and debates and have different opinions, but it's really even more important, I think, that we are able to agree on some form of objective reality.
Well, you talk about reality, but there seems to be a lot less of it about than there was a few years ago. For example, J.K. Rowling most recently got into trouble for suggesting that if you happen to be raped by someone with a penis, chances are that someone is a man. That would seem a statement of the obvious. It's actually how rape law in Scotland, which she was talking about, is defined. If you aren't a man, you can't rape someone. Yet now apparently rapists with penises will be allowed to be in women's prisons. So the point here, Zuby, is you have like courageous individuals such as yourself who are prepared to take the heat on this, but it's not just a fringe group of activists. It's now that government, the health system that suddenly talks about people who menstruate instead of women. It's the media who report straight-faced that such and such a woman has died of prostate cancer. It's that the government, the media, the culture is all against you. And there aren't that many people who are prepared to speak up as you are on this.
Well, I think this is the problem with a lot of these issues, Mark, which is that there is a pandemic of cowardice that is going on, right? I mean, these very fringe views, what percentage of people out there truly believe that men can get pregnant or that women can have penises? These are very fringe, extraordinary views. These are not mainstream views, but because the majority of people who know that this is incorrect and is not biologically right and is nonsense, they are unwilling to say anything. And I understand why people have that trepidation. I know how nasty some of these so-called activists can be. I know that people don't want to be called names or be called any kind of phobe or ism or anything like that. However, I think that if people en masse were to simply stand up and to stand for the truth, again, we're not talking about opinions here, and we're not talking about trying to advocate for any type of harm or discrimination or prejudice against anyone. Far from it. We are simply acknowledging reality, because if we don't acknowledge reality, that has very serious consequences. If you entertain a lie for a very long period of time, it has very real consequences on the world. And the reason why things have gotten this stage where you're talking about having male inmates in female prisons, that's how it's gotten so far. So for anyone who's wondering how it's gotten that far, it's gotten that far because the majority of people are unwilling to say no, or unwilling to say, you know what, hang on, that's going too far.
That's very true. And when you destroy the meanings of fundamental words like man and woman, you're destroying the foundations of your society. Just finally, let me ask you this, because you spent part of your childhood in Saudi Arabia. That, for many people, can be an oppressive society. If you want to drink alcohol, if you want to have a Bible, that's illegal in Saudi Arabia. Yet it's oppressive, as it were, for the benefit of the majority. We seem to be heading in a Saudi direction, freedom-wise. But it's an oppression that supports, as you said, fringe opinions. That someone with a penis is a woman. These are fringe opinions, but in the interests of supporting them, we're heading in an unfree direction. Which is in some ways even nuttier than Saudi Arabia.
It's a really interesting point you bring up there, and it's something that I've been sort of pondering in my head for a while. I don't know my exact response to that. It's something I'd want to dwell on for a little bit of time. But I think that something that's interesting is this concept of intolerance. And I think that intolerance is something that is innate to human beings in a way, and certainly to human societies and cultures. And I guess it should, not everything should be tolerated. But I think that where those boundaries lie and how things are enforced, whether that is through the legal system or through social systems or even through big tech and media and things like that, I think it varies from place to place, and it varies from time period to time period. But I think if we're going to live in a truly free and open and civil society, then I want to reassert the point that everyone should be treated fairly and equally and decently, and we should look at each other as individuals and as human beings. We shouldn't be trying to deny anybody any type of rights. That's a huge step in the wrong direction. But if we're, instead of just talking about tolerance and talking about diversity, I think people need to embody these things rather than just say these words which sound nice.
That's a great note on which to end. Thank you, Zuby, and a very happy new year to you. This is Old Lang Steyn signing off for 2021, but I'll be here Monday at 8. Monday at 8, here's Polly.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
A very mild start to 2022. It's going to be a blustery day with gusty winds, but although there'll be some rain around, much of the day will be dry and bright. And as I said, very, very mild. Low pressure is sitting out to the west, and that's allowing these southerly winds to bring the